Here are the top 5 areas you should avoid when it comes to trying to lay roots in Toronto, whether it's buying your home or renting your home. Now, in regards to how I came up with these 5 areas, it's from being in Toronto for 30 years and selling real estate for almost 10 years. So I'm just trickling down a lot of experience and also what clients are requesting and what areas that we generally try to tell our clients to stay away from, and distilled it down to these 5 areas for you to avoid. So if you are looking for some help on how to navigate this real estate market, you're trying to find and buy a home in the right area, you can book a call with me using the link that's right here. It's www.chatwithzen.com. Simply click on a date and a time that works best for you. And then when you see the prompt, fill in your name, email, mobile phone number, and a question you have for me, and then we'll chat then. Good day, Toronto. Welcome to another episode of Prime Properties TV. My name is Zhen, and I run and operate a RE/MAX in the Greater Toronto area, on top of making awesome educational real estate content just like this one for you. And if you like the content we're putting out right now, make sure we spread the knowledge by smashing that like button and subscribing to the Prime Properties channel, because it takes a lot of effort for me to accumulate a lot of this information and distill it down to you in like a sub 10-minute video for you. So I appreciate the help by liking and subscribing. Now, here are the top 5 areas that you should be avoiding. And like I said in the beginning of the intro, it's a lot of experience and things to avoid. But one of the things that a lot of people always want to measure, like areas to avoid, really comes down to safety, right? So I'm going to share my screen with you for the rest of the video and kind of show you what areas to avoid and what reasons there are. And, honestly, some of the perks that actually some of these areas have. But to give you a little bit more of a history of how I came up with this, right? Like I actually grew up in the Trinity Bellwoods area, and Trinity Bellwoods when I was growing up was not cool. It was not trendy. It was actually rather dangerous. And we lived at Queen and Ossington at the intersection. And I'll probably put a photo up here back in like the early 2000s and late 90s. And there was a KMH building across from us. So I actually remember as a kid, I would have to jump over a pool of like urine from the patients at KMH just to get to the 63 Ossington bus to go to school. So that area has gentrified, and it was definitely kind of like sketchy back then. But now, according to Vogue, I think a few years ago, again, I'll put a poster up here, it's the coolest street, right? So what I'm saying is these areas, some of them have potential to keep changing, and a lot of them have infrastructure that's actually coming along. But at the moment right now, these are areas that people are trying to avoid right now for a multitude of reasons and experience that it's going to make this video way too long if I get into. So the first thing I'm going to share with you right now is kind of the Toronto Police Service map, like I was saying, and it comes down to safety, right? So you can access this, or I'll put a link in the description below. And a lot of people, you have to understand, when Toronto's growing so big, a lot of neighborhoods change. So when we just look strictly at, say, assault, you can actually see a lot of people are getting assaulted in the downtown core, right? And that's given because, look, there's a lot of people over here. But you can see there's going to be a lot of people in the east side and the west side in the most extreme parts of Toronto, and that's kind of some of the areas that I've highlighted. Now, another common one, if you're trying to lay roots, is you want to watch where the break-in entry is. So you can actually see that there's a lot more break-in entries kind of in the northwest pocket in Toronto. And again, there are some pockets here. And same thing with Toronto downtown being so dense, there's going to be a lot over there as well, right? And then if you go into shootings, which is the other 3 things people are kind of concerned about, you can kind of see basically the west pocket over here, and also the east pocket will have some. But if you go along the middle of the corridor, which is kind of the most expensive parts of Toronto, obviously a lot less, right? Because more affluent areas. But again, like you guys can play around with this, and you can turn on what you think are concerned about. But just remember, as a city grows and more population, it's very, very hard to control a lot of it. That's why so much of it is in like downtown core, because there's a mishmash of everything and so many people live there, right? So without further ado, the first area you should avoid, and it has a reputation, is Jane and Finch. So this is actually the Black Creek area. And if you actually look at the major intersection, one of the things you're going to see, the commonality, is that a lot of people just try to avoid the very dense old apartment building styles because they're a concern of lower income or the subsidized housing from the government, right? So they kind of produce the different type of clientele or different type of neighborhoods, right? But if you actually look here, you can see there's a lot of construction going on over here because they're doing the Finch light rail extension, right? So it actually cuts right through. You can see last time I drove through here, which was a few months ago, it's just tons and tons of construction. So it actually has a lot going for it right now. It's just that there's a lot of community housing, which a lot of people have kind of just try to stay away from. There's also a lot of really, really old 20, 30-year-old apartment buildings, which are 1,000 square feet with massive maintenance fees, but the prices haven't actually really appreciated. And you can actually get some stuff there around for $300,000, maybe $400,000 for something that large. It's just, it doesn't make any sense because the maintenance fees are so large, right? But if you actually kind of look at the areas and why this area is actually quite good is one, you got the Finch light rail coming through. You have access to the 400, you have access to the 407, you have access to York University. So you actually have a good home. There's actually a lot of opportunity to be renting homes in that area to students, right? So it's got a lot going on for it right now. So in the future, I wouldn't be surprised if it gets gentrified, but it just kind of has a very bad name attached to it, the Jane and Finch area. And this kind of like yellow highlighted area is kind of what I would say try to avoid. Again, like it's not like I think you're going to get robbed in daylight, but there's certain streets you should definitely avoid. But it's just be smart about it, right? And if you really have a choice, you know, it's an area that we don't necessarily recommend, right? Just not even from like safety perspective, just from a real estate kind of appreciation perspective. Now, the second area we're going to be talking about is Moss Park, which is on the east side of downtown. So which is incredibly close to downtown. So this is the old City Hall. You got Jarvis over here. And the main intersection you really want to avoid is Dundas and Sherbourne. And I have driven through it on like bright daylight and even nighttime. I personally feel a little bit sketched out when I drive through. So let me just give you an idea of what it looks like. So you can see over here, this is the corner of Dundas and Sherbourne. This is actually a lot of the area that I would say highly avoid. You can see if you actually zoom in here, there's a lot of people hanging out. There's a lot of trash here and a lot of gatherings, right? So a lot of people try to, you know, avoid here. The irony is if you look over here in the little back over here, you can see there's a lot of condos here. That's Regent Park. Regent Park has a pretty bad name, but it's actually been gentrified a lot with the Daniels development in the last like 10 years or so. It's actually quite good because it's, you know, close to the highway, right? So the DVP is just like right on the side over here. And you have a lot of access and a whole strip of like condos and like really bright, well-lit kind of like new commercial there and like a lot of new facilities. And then Tridel is building the component that's like closer to Gerrard in the next few years. So Regent Park is not bad, but it's just kind of right at the edge of Dundas and Sherbourne, which is I'm saying what you should avoid. And the other ironic side is if you go into the west side, you can see over here, this is where a lot of the condos are coming up, and it's a lot of condos geared towards Ryerson, which is Dundas and Jarvis. So a lot of people would say you should basically try to avoid kind of like this little strip here. And there are some condos that are coming up, but this is kind of the university corridor. So it's right on the edge. So like this side on the west is actually not bad. East side over here, which is where Regent Park is also against not bad. But at nighttime, you kind of want to avoid Dundas and Sherbourne being the main pocket. And if you kind of want to avoid a little bit of like sketchiness, you want to avoid Moss Park, where there's a lot of actually like people lying around on benches and sleeping there during the nighttime as well. Yeah, that's kind of really the only part of downtown that's a little bit off. But if you go like a few minutes like outside of this yellow box over here, there's actually a lot of new areas and a lot of nice homes there. So you just got to be careful of like which kind of streets you walk up and down in downtown. Now, the third area that you should avoid is the Fairbanks area, which is Dufferin and Eglinton. So this little highlighted yellow area is kind of what you should try to be avoiding. But one of the crazy things about this is you have the Eglinton LRT just like running right across it. So I actually think it's going to be gentrified quite a bit. But there's also a lot of like older kind of townhomes in this area by Oakland Village, just like north of Vaughan Road, that a lot of people try to avoid because it's got like a high crime rate, and also like this little pocket over here just after Dufferin, right? The interesting thing, like if you actually know Fairbanks as an area, is it's actually really well situated because you got the Allen here. You got also the yellow line on the University Spadina extension that cuts all the way over here. Yorkdale as a mall is just like up the street over here on Dufferin. And you actually got one of the most expensive areas in all of Toronto over here at Forest Hill. Like if you actually just cross the bridge here on Elm Ridge, like past the little circle, there's a bunch of apartments here similar to like why a lot of people avoid the other last two areas. Same thing in the Fairbanks area. It's just a lot of people are trying to avoid, you know, this pocket where there's a lot of old apartments and kind of like lower income kind of people, a lot of community housing here. But if you actually go on this little strip here, it's actually quite, you know, lively at nighttime. There's a lot of like a Jamaican background where they're like doing the barrel drum kind of cooking at nighttime. It's actually kind of cool. It's just this is an area that I think is gentrifying, and of all the areas I've picked out, this is probably going to gentrify the most and the fastest, just because you got Eglinton cutting right across, right? And there's actually, call it like quasi midtown. It's got like good access to a lot of things here too, right? So not as bad as some people would say, but it's just one of those areas that some people are trying to avoid, again, for the reason of like apartments and homelessness. And then the fourth area we got here is Rexdale, which is actually just to the west of Jane and Finch, right? So this is just not a pocket. The main areas you kind of want to avoid is kind of like along Albion between like Kipling and Islington, which is again, just a lot of like older apartment buildings. The crime rate here is also very high. So if you actually Google Rexdale, a lot of like bad reports come up. And if you look at the neighborhood areas, right? So from the Toronto Police, you can see a lot of the shootings and kind of like assault is kind of in this pocket right here, which is actually Rexdale and the Jane and Finch area. So that's kind of why a lot of people try to avoid it. So a lot of these areas you can buy some like decent homes here, but you're trying to avoid it. And I would say Rexdale is one of the few areas you can actually buy a detached for less than $1 million in Toronto. So again, there's like perks to that. But the other thing that I find very interesting with like Rexdale is like it's very, very well kind of situated. Like it's basically between 4 major highways. You got 407, you got 400, you got 401, and then you got the 427, right? So it's just like boxed in. There's lots of transit there. There's lots of industrial there. All the big 18-wheeler trucks are always kind of just in this little pocket over here. So it's actually really, really well connected. The problem, again, is just like really the high crime rate. And people would say you would want to avoid Jamestown and Thistletown, which is kind of where like a lot of the crimes would happen. And because it's near the airport, which is technically in Mississauga, like Pearson Airport is in Mississauga, it's actually very near the flight path. So there's actually a lot of planes that actually pass through Rexdale, and you can hear them. They're rather loud because they're kind of like landing. That's the word I'm looking for in that area. So again, like just be cautious, but it's not the end of the world. But these are some of the things why people want to avoid this area. And the last one here, I would just kind of put on here. I think personally, this area has been given a lot of flack. It's not as bad as some people, make it out to be. And that actually is Melbourne in Scarborough. So this is just the main intersection being Melbourne Mall, which is at Tapscott, McLevin, and also Nelson, which is kind of like just around here. It's like a decently well situated area. It's near the zoo, north of 401. So like the transit actually is pretty really good. But similar to kind of like the first two areas I was talking about, a lot of people are just trying to avoid kind of like a lot of apartment buildings, and you can see over here, which is about the main intersection, right? A lot of older condos, similar to like Jane and Finch. But the other thing is there's like a little bit of a crime rate there, but there's some people I know that have lived there. I have some clients who moved from there and say, you know what, it's actually not as bad as some people have made it out to be. But nonetheless, they have decided to move out of that area, right? For whatever reason of their own, but it's not as bad as some of the first 4 areas, right? I think Melbourne has a really, really bad rep for kind of like what happens there, but there are some people who kind of justify saying, hey, you know what, it's not that bad, and you can get actually a pretty decent detached there for like around $1 million, $1.1 million. So you get a little bit of like suburbs vibe, but it's still kind of right at the edge of Toronto by the zoo, right? So those are my top 5 areas to avoid. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? What other areas do you think I should add on to it? Or if you think that you're in one of these 5 areas I talked about that actually doesn't justify being in the top 5 areas to avoid, let me know in the comment section below. And again, if you are looking for some help on how to navigate this real estate market and buying into a home and laying some roots in the right area, you can book a call with me using the link that's right here. It's www.chatwithzen.com. Until next time, your move, your future. See ya. Now that I'm done watching this video, I think you should check out this video. And you know what? Why don't you check out this video too?